We live for. Okay. Oh boy. And we're live. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Smudcast number 678. The Oliphant in the room. Does anyone know what an Oliphant is?
That's it's a those elephants from Lord of the Rings.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's an actual last name of one of my Canadian federal PMs, but so I was like, is this guy Canadian? Does he know the Liberal Party very well? But I guess not. So there we go. Is fantasy racist and sexist? What a great topic. I'm going to say this.
Yes.
I'm going to say a little. Yeah, it might be controversial. Yes, because when you talk about fantasy or the medieval period with magic or supernatural forces, they usually revolve around basic natures and conditions that we might have thought about in the Dark Ages or 1,000 years ago. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with addressing those issues or having those themes in your story and bringing them out as we own this land, you were here first, blah, 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 we took it from you. Whatever the conflict is, I think that's a great flavor for your setting. And this is how we address these issues in fiction. We don't have to swear about it in political arenas. We could do it in fiction. Say, yeah, I read that book and it addressed it very well, and I don't want to hurt anyone who's just different than me. It's like, yes, thank you. That's all it is. So when it comes to fantasy, I say yes, and I'm proud to have read books that had characters like that who were racist, who thought they were all the Jedi and all the Sith and all the power combined, that they thought they were the best and better than everyone else, and they were the usurpers and they were the power mongers. That's what we need. We need these fantasy marauders running around our fantasy worlds, causing chaos and having heroes be born. That's what you have in fantasy. So I see nothing wrong with that. Obviously, it's how it's told in a story. What writer knows what they're doing, which we could talk about any theme. It doesn't matter. If the writer doesn't know what he's doing with it, it's going to suck. So, yeah, I would prefer my racism to be written well, please. So, yeah. That's
that, and it adds character. As much as that might terrify a certain group of people, a certain demographic, is that sexism, classism, whatever you want to call it, all those aspects, like parts of culture... Well, that too, but they add flavor to the setting.
Yeah, and when you set up characters, exactly.
For example, the one that immediately comes to mind is Bretonia from a Warhammer Fantasy Battles setting, where Bretonia is extremely patriarchal. Like, women are not expected to be knights. They're expected to be shopkeepers. But yet every year, a woman or a knight is found dead, and it turns out to be a woman. Like, there are people that want to seek out glory in battle and are willing to pretend to be men to do so. That's really neat. That's a really cool aspect of the setting. And if you want to pursue such a storyline with a character, great. All power to you. But that would be a lot less impressive if women were encouraged from birth to become knights, or it was completely standardized. It's why such stories are usually not tackled in, say, Warhammer 40k, because there it doesn't fucking matter who you are. Yeah, Imperium was always going to need more bodies for the meat grinder, whether they have a dick or a pussy.
Yeah, in a lot of the fantasy novels I've read, the authors are pretty politically mixed. They don't really care about politics and putting them into their books, but they write male and female characters, elves, dwarves, humans, whatever. They don't care. They just want an interesting character. And I remember one of them, Terry Brooks, did an offshoot called The Knight of the Word. One of the main characters was a female, young woman, like 18, 19. She was like an Olympian or going to be an Olympian. She was an expert runner. And that was just a setup because she was going to be doing a lot of running from all the scary fantasy creatures chasing after her. So it's like, oh, great. She's an amazing athlete. And she's hanging out with a wizard who's this cool dude that can summon lightning. So it's like, okay, I mean, give us the female characters who make sense. We can respect, oh, she's an athlete, fine. We know she could run away from danger and she's not going to lose her breath and cry and whatever. So we need those characters. We need that sort of contrast saying, oh, you're a disgusting human female. And then she takes off and no one can catch her because she's so good. Like, that's what we want. We want that build up, and then we want the racist or we want the sexist or the guy who thinks he's so great to like, what? No way. And they look like a fool. So perfect setup, easy to introduce characters that way. All right. Let us get going. This is a 12.5-minute video. I know nothing about this fellow or his video. And how long is it? Well, wait a second. How long ago?
12 minutes.
12 minutes came out
should be fine.
in May. This is during the pandemic, in May of 2020.
Oh.
Oh boy, the year of our Lord 2020 where nothing happened.
Yeah. Well, anyway, here we go.
A short time ago, a good friend of mine made me aware of a contentious...
Is this really soft voice? I could barely hear him.
Sounds
It's
like shit
very
audio
quiet.
mixing.
Okay, I've cranked up the volume, so I do apologize, guys.
Twitter thread whether or not orcs are a racist trope. This is not the first time this debate has arisen, and in fact, fantasy has been the subject of much criticism over the years, with some people seeing it as a genre of wish fulfillment for nerdy white men.
Okay.
To anyone who holds that view, I would encourage them to read some fantasy from the last 30 years. To give some quick examples, there's Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen, which is has a world with great diversity and no misogyny. Or look at N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy. In her books, she does a brilliant job of portraying the consequences of oppression. Or you can go back as far as Ursula Le Guin's Earthseed books back in the 70s.
These are actually really good books, so they just get, these two women get quoted a lot. Le Guin is very famous for not just fantasy but sci-fi in general. She's pretty well known. And the previous one, I think she's a black author as well, and she gets quoted a lot. So yeah,
I'm adding it to the list.
Yeah, these themes, like I'm like, oh, here we go. That's not why you read those books. They're in there, but that's like one of like 20 themes they got going.
We're reading it for racism.
Yeah.
So we can speak in more terms.
There's a lack of misogyny. It's like, that sucks. I want more misogyny. Give me more. I want more.
He was exploring her feminist vision. So actually, the genre has many talented women writers and thankfully an increasing number of people of color who are writing great fantasy books. But there is a legacy to consider, and many common tropes in fantasy have their roots in colonialist and racist.
Oh, fuck. This guy, for the first minute, like, I was like, holy shit, he might be a good guy. He might be on our side.
Nah, it's nothing about size. It's him being a dumbass.
I'm trying to fathom what he means by colonialism in fantasy. Does that mean like people at the turn of the age of last century were writing fantasy?
Because I think like most of the authors have like based their depiction of orcs from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, so it's probably just they missed the point.
Maybe. I think they get that, or they translate that into like modern days with D&D and the various other book of tabletop games that use orcs.
Oh yeah, orcs. Like
ubiquitously,
they're black or Jewish. Yes,
maybe, but it's
very famous.
It's like we've seen that whenever you go into a comic book store, they always have the figurines that they would have on tabletop games, and that's just part of fantasy. Like that's kind of the thing that turned me out, because there's just so much of it. I'm like, I don't care, because I've seen it so much, I've read it so much, and it's like, great, you got it. What are you doing with it? Like, if it's just racism, like I don't think that's going to be very fun. But unless there's something with the character and they're like an ongoing main character, and that'd be great, because then it can show this character has a culture, they're warlike, they're tribal, blah blah blah, and Warhammer does that. Every other story that's big does that, or franchise. So it's like, give me more. It can't just be that.
Sexist history. Fantasy as a genre was born in the 19th and early 20th century, so it would be miraculous if...
You mean modern fantasy?
Is he talking about speculative fiction? Is he talking about just like some...
Can we go back by 10 seconds?
Sure.
I want to know.
And racist and sexist history. Fantasy as a genre was born in the 19th and early 20th century.
Yeah, it means generally fantasy. That's a lie. You're lying.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
There's like so many like scriptures that state like fantasy happened way longer than the 19th and the 20th century.
Yeah, so modern fantasy is what he's referring to.
Well, hopefully
Yes.
pre-Tolkien, like anything before, because Tolkien brings it on the map, right? Everyone knows like, oh wow.
Yeah, like the Bible.
Oh yeah, that's true. You can go that far back. Yeah, but I'm trying to think of like Lost World and a bunch of other futurist style novels that like the Time Machine, like stuff like that. Like, oh okay, what would we do if we went back so far? What would tribal? Because you could say medieval or tribal like mankind could be considered fantasy in certain contexts. So
or like something like the Green Knight. Like I think that's also fitting in the fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah, that there's certain elements that are focused on romance and poetry more or less. But yeah, that would fit. What the hell was that oldest one I remember? It was like the King and the something. I'm trying to remember, but it was probably H.G. Wells or something like that.
What about King Arthur? Wouldn't that count as fantasy?
For sure. Folklore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any folklore would be fantasy. Okay.
Well, the Green Knight is basically a spin-off of King Arthur, so...
Oh, yeah, that's true. Vladimir, thank you, sir. Real quick, who had Russian military coup on their 2023 bingo cards? Because I had it as my free space. Really? I had no idea. I haven't been paying attention to what happened because...
It's already been over, apparently.
Yeah, so the private military company that Russia has been relying on to fight on the Bakhmut front, which is where you usually see the trench war footage, they rebelled against Russia and started marching towards Warsaw. Or not Warsaw, fucking, what's it called?
Moscow?
Moscow, thank you. Fucking
Yeah,
Warsaw.
they have apparently given up.
Yep. Because they finally went, okay, we'll give you some extra ammunition. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, I do not trust any of the data or any of the information coming out of any of the news sources, so I just don't bother watching it. It's just...
You know, after like the Ghost of Kiev was like a complete lie, I've given up on like just watching any of that crap.
Yeah, it's...
Of course the
that
Ghost
was
of
so
Kiev was
fucking
fucking...
hilarious.
Of course the Ghost of Kiev was fake. Anyone that actually legit believed that the Ghost of Kiev was real don't know how fucking rare these fights are. And then suddenly we already got an ace within like 48 hours of the conflict starting. Yeah, get real.
All right, let's continue.
Miraculous if sexism and racism hadn't found their way into the genre. As a white man, I believe it's very important for me to struggle with these questions and issues.
Why?
However, I hope that if I have the privilege of having a discussion with a woman or a person...
Out of context, that sounds hilarious.
But that sounds so fucking racist.
Yeah, women
It's
can't enjoy
racist
fantasy.
and sexist.
It's so rare for those non-white women to read fantasy for me to have a conversation with. It's like, join a book club. You know how many women read fantasy?
Do we speak the same language? Oh, cool. Okay, that it means that we don't have any barriers left.
Yeah, and when you join the book club, everyone reads the same book. It's pretty easy to talk about.
Like we aren't just like discovering like this strange part of the earth. They're like really brown people.
There are clubs in cities where people once a week go to, and they talk about their favorite thing. It's amazing.
Oh.
Now there's also the spooky genre that he might not be ready for called the monster fuckers. You might want to learn about, because that's a lot of women. A lot of women in that.
Okay, let's go.
On this subject, the grace and the wisdom and the humility to do the vast majority of the listening. So...
Oh my God, this guy feels like he's whipped himself. Like, forget women whipping this guy into shape. I'm going to beat myself up over being a white guy. Like, okay. Let's listen to women.
It sounds like a guy was just divorced, like he lost all his manhood. But I don't want to jump to conclusions.
Yeah, this is a blue screen background, so it feels kind of tacky. But
Yeah.
even the whatever jacket he's wearing, it feels a little like, dude, are you like coming out of like a bar? Like what? Some speakeasy? Like what's happening here? Are you plastered?
He stole Mr. Pearson's wardrobe.
I don't know. Something's weird with this guy.
Let's address the Oliphant in the room. Is fantasy racist and sexist? Well, first of all, I think we need to dig a little bit into what we mean by the question.
Oh my God.
Fantasy is a genre, a product of the people who write it and read it. So if the question is about those people, the people who write and read fantasy, my response is that they are probably no more racist and sexist than any other group of people. In fact,
Wow, you said
through
nothing.
teaching courses on fantasy and interacting with people on YouTube who are
You
fans
teach
of
courses?
fantasy, I have to say that I have found
This man
them, for
teaches?
the most part, generous, cordial, and really wonderful people. Though, of course, I am biased. But can good people fail to question and thus pass on cultural assumptions and tropes that are racist and sexist?
Oh,
I'd like to take an example, a very well-known one, and that would be J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh no.
First of all, I
Oh,
need to say
boy.
that Tolkien is
I
my
knew it.
hero. He is the reason I learned Old English and Old Norse. He is the reason I've been wearing this tweed jacket for the last 32 years. His
What?
books awakened my sense
Why
of
would you do
wonder
that?
and imagination and put me on a path.
you inspired me to never change my clothes, J.R. Tolkien.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I like.
I grave robbed Tolkien.
Yeah, I really like Joe Rogan. So I'm gonna wear like tank tops and shave my head like all the time. Like, what are you talking about?
Finally, I can look like Saitama.
Like, what the hell, dude? Get a suit. Look better. Get a wardrobe going. Something.
I mean, like that jacket looks pretty good for something that you wear like for 32 years. Like he keeps it really well.
I'm assuming he doesn't have a smoking jacket, but who knows?
He does his own dry cleaning.
Hang on. But there has been a long time debate about racism and sexism in his books. Clearly, Tolkien was against the extreme forms of racism in his day. In his letters, he called Hitler, for example, a ruddy little ignoramus. In 1938, when he was approached by German publishers who wanted to publish The Hobbit, and they asked him if he was Aryan, Tolkien bristled at the question and in fact declared that he would have been proud to have Jewish ancestry. He also spoke and wrote against...
What does this have anything to like? What are we talking about?
Like I think he's trying to set up.
He's arguing that whether this is sexist or racist or whatnot.
Because he doesn't like Nazis and he wishes he were Jewish in that context. It's like,
Nah, he's setting up he can still be racist even if he hated Nazis.
oh god, this is so dumb.
apart. It would be wrong to put The Lord of the Rings on the same level as something deliberately hateful like Mein Kampf. However, I personally can no longer gloss over the swarthy Southrons and the sallow Easterlings and the orcs, whom Tolkien himself described in one of his letters, and I'm quoting here, as squat, broad, flat-nosed, sallow-skinned, with wide mouths and slant eyes. In fact, degraded and repulsive versions of the, to Europeans, least lovely Mongol types.
That's fine. What's wrong with describing them as such? They're the bad guys. They're evil. They want to kill you.
The actual
Is it
racism
because
is
it
when
is-
you see like a black person and you're like, wow, this description
Is it
fits
because he
exactly
said
like
that
this.
Is it because he said that it'd be like the most negative representation of what the invading Mongols look like? Is that why?
I don't
Yeah, I assume, yeah.
like. We could imagine. Okay, let's say Tolkien made the orcs even more beautiful than the elves. Would that make any difference?
That'll probably make it worse.
It would make it worse, yeah.
Like what is this guy? Oh, because he describes them as ugly, therefore it's racist. It has racial.
But like,
I think it's just because he mentioned Mongols.
But this is all in his letters. Like, who cares what Tolkien was thinking? Like, is in the book, what is the problem with the orcs? Well, they're going to eat you. They're cannibals. They're going to conquer the known world because they want to. Who cares what color their skin is? It depends what they do to the rest of the species.
They were created with evil magic. I wonder how they're gonna look like.
Yeah, and
Also, those Mongols weren't too friendly with the Europeans. Just saying.
Yeah, that's true. I don't see the problem, even if they were these even more uppity than the elves were in terms of beauty and grace and power and all that jazz. So imagine fighting this supreme race, this Aryan race or whatever, of orcs that are super powerful, and you got to figure out superior tactics or strategies to beat them. It's still It's still an issue. It doesn't matter whether they're grungy and dirty and they come from the muck, or up high. It makes no difference. They're the bad guys.
I actually would say, this is gonna be a hot take, but I think racism makes Lord of the Rings better because, like, there are small glimpses you can see between the dwarves and the elves. Like Gimli initially really hates elves.
Yes.
And like when he finally meets Galadriel personally, he becomes like almost like a simp, like to the point that like he's furious whenever somebody dares to insult Galadriel.
Well, the whole point of The Hobbit and obviously Lord of the Rings is that the hobbits, because of their race and species and culture and the way they think and the way they live, they are the best suited to carry the ring because they're almost incorruptible, and no one else wants to do it except for them. So that is a racial trait. Whether that's racist, it's a positive form of a racial trait, and that accounts for culture and lifestyle. And you look at the Shire, and it's, as I think Whisp would say, it's like a paradise where everyone is eating cheese and having...
It is a paradise, and like the last chapters is like really reflecting on like how much it changed through the war. Yeah,
so you can do racism well. You could have a positive and negative racism or racial. It makes no difference. That's just the way you depict your world. And in this case, there's a lore reason, meaning they are the best suited for the job. So I would say that if you don't have those elements, you make a weaker case for what's happening with the characters, like the four. Like they had four. It was four hobbits, right? Merry Pippin.
Four hobbits, yes.
Samwise and Frodo. So you needed that sort of diversity. And to take away their uniqueness, to take away what the hobbits were, and just place them in the world of man, like just little people in the world of man, would not explain why they're the best suited. Why not just take a strong man? It would be the same. It would be better because he's stronger than all the little guys combined. So you want that little guy triumphing over all these other fellows in strength of character or will or whatever the psychology is. Okay, Vladimir, thanks again. Oh, as a white man, yeah, I know, we went over that. This guy looks like he'd get mad that a woman didn't blow him when he held the door open. I don't know. There's something like he's this guy who'd be like genuflecting to females or something. It's just like, I don't know about this fellow. A little uncomfortable. I had to go like sit next to him in a bar or something. Like, hey, how's it going, buddy? Like, oh, greetings to you, sir. Like, oh boy, here we go.
Oh God, he's British.
Oh, he is?
No, it's like, just like if somebody walks up to me and says, "Good evening, sir," I'll just assume he's fucking British.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Anyway. Brits don't say good morning. Come on. Anyway. They just tell you to go and die.
There we go.
Pretty hard to read that.
Why?
Why? Elaborate.
It's also an indication that the orcs and other villains are lacking all complexity. And
what do you mean complexity?
No, they don't. Like, have you read the book? Because like he said, like he was praising Tolkien for like so many things. That was like the fucking setup, like Law said before. But There are so many parts of the book where you get to see the dialogue between the orcs, so they are complex on their own accord. But yeah, what does he mean by this?
Yeah, it's not as fleshed out as all the other races or the species because
The story isn't from their perspective.
Yeah,
for a good reason.
It's only to like the second and third book where you get to, because they capture Frodo and they drag him along and they have to listen to them and they're always talking about
Like when Merry and Pippin were being dragged to Isengard and then they got interrupted.
Where you
I
hear
think that
them
was a big part.
bitching about food and how they
Yeah.
need to run in the sun.
Yeah, that one. Like there was like so much in like why the Uruk-hai are like so different from like the normal orcs.
Yeah, so there is definitely world building of the orcs, just not as much as the other races because we don't spend as much time in their world, and the world of man is like really diverse. There's all these lords and kingdoms and what have you. So they're not as interesting, to be honest, as the other species. Like the elves are probably the most like, wow, what the hell? These godlike creatures that know magic and they have ring power and they live for so long.
I'd argue the orcs' diversity is more interesting than the elves' diversity, because the elves' diversity is different flavors of God. Whereas the orcs are like, oh yeah, you got the goblins of Moria, you got the Uruk-hai, you got your gnome lords, you got your snow orcs, you got your good and the bad orcs.
Yeah, and they're not stupid. They're not like complete like Neanderthals running around beating the shit out of each other. They have big conversations and they talk about what do we do with these halflings and are we going to eat them soon and how do we eat them? So they have their own language. They have like Tolkien didn't just say, okay, whatever, they're indecipherable. No, they spoke and we understood them. And there's passages that last for pages on orcs just squabbling over each other, what to do and battle tactics and all that good jazz. So they're
But
not some shallow villain.
It's a very odd conclusion to say that they are not as diverse as the other races because he described them as ugly.
And even if they weren't ugly, it would make no difference. So
yeah, it's like if the elves were ugly, would that make them any less diverse?
Yeah, I mean, if they lived for only 300 years or something, it'd be like, oh, that's horrible. No, it's fine. It's totally cool. All this world building is why we read Tolkien. So more is better with Tolkien. It's because he knows how to make interesting settings. So if he sucked at it, then yeah, obviously more would be painful because like, oh, I have to read more of this junk. But it's not.
If he was a George R. R. Martin, I would be anguished at the length of his works.
But George R. R. Martin would be like, oh god, like this is making so much sense. Like how can he do this? But really, like I wouldn't mind even role-playing orcs because like they are just pure evil. That's the selling point to me because they have no redeeming qualities. Like sometimes that's just a good thing to have in a story. Like when you take Lord of the Rings as an entire like book, like it's a fight between good and evil, and that's just it. I don't need to have multi-dimensional characters for the orcs all the time. There are like a few of them, which the book names, plus the Nazgul. But the point is that like Sauron is controlling all of them, and he's just like a glorified dictator for all that matters.
All right, let's keep going.
I don't know like what this guy wants.
And serve us to the white heroes of the story. I don't think
they aren't all just white. They are like different races, like humans, elves. Like they aren't just pure humans either. Like Aragorn, for example, like he's half elf. If I recall, like
it says white due to the complexion of their skin, not because they're human white.
What?
Yeah, there's a reason why the elves are the way they are.
Are Asians like white in that respect? Like, are we going by Yahtzee logic again?
Yeah, I mean, did he want like the whole race of current year people that we know of in the Lord of the Rings? Like, why would you do that? Like, what would be the point?
These myths were created around like European myths. So, how how can we just get more
Yeah,
color
I don't
into
like this
story?
applying current ethics or morals to what happened 100 years ago in fiction. Like it's so silly. Like why would you even? Well, clearly Tolkien was not as diverse as we are. It's like no shit. What? So you're gonna blame him for that? Like what do you?
Okay, calm down, Smut. Calm down.
It's like, gee, did I ever like the same with the northern Europeans and Norse mythology? Have you ever seen a black person? No, they have no idea that there were people in Africa, let alone Africa even existed. So you can't blame them for their folklore to be centered around their beliefs and their experiences.
No, here's the thing. They probably, no, more than likely knew that there are black people. Do you think they would fucking care? It's like seeing somebody, as the Greeks described them, the roasted ones, or the charred ones. They knew that black people existed, but they didn't include any of that shit in.
Well, they'd have to learn their
anything.
language. They have to talk to them. They have to share ideas. They'd have to say, "Well, we believe in Odin and all these other gods." We're like, "Who the hell?"
I believe in Ubachek from down south.
Yeah, it'd be like, what are we talking about? Like, he would have to then have a whole society and culture and generations of people living together who have these arguments and invent their own religion or believe in whatever spirituality. And then you could then make a language and all this other jazz that they would work together to make folklore. But we didn't have that. So they worked with their own people and invented their own dreams and stories. And that's fine. So we can't use modern day politics to point at people 1,000 years ago. That's silly. That's monumentally silly.
Okay, it takes on this white man's burden of we need to have Gimli be black if we are to correct the failures of the past. No, you don't.
But what would that add to the story if it would?
They don't care. It's a sign. It is a need for you as the white man to lift up, to take upon the burdens of these people's need to be represented in your media, to raise them up for they cannot do it themselves. It's the most egotistical, narcissistic bullshit.
We said the word.
All right. Okay.
But it is.
Let's keep going. Here's Vladimir again. Personally, I'm in the human master race crowd. I was thinking of the PC master race, but okay, human master race crowd. There we go.
But I have to be in complete agreeing with Lal here because like we can't see this shit going down right now with the Spider-Verse movies because like they let a Black Peter Parker, not be a Black Peter Parker, but Miles Morales, and like now they are like so entitled, like they are demanding like the production team to like how they should work on this show, and they hate all the fan arts, even if you would go by a little shade down from like the original. It's all ridiculous to me. Like, I don't know when it's gonna stop. Also, Nick wants to be on.
Nick, where's Nick? Is he even in my friends list? I don't even know.
I can ask him.
If he's on yours, go right ahead.
I guess he comes in.
Yeah, we're almost done the video. So we're halfway done, so it's like
We don't need it.
if he wants
It's
to
too
join,
late.
it's not going to hurt anyone. That's fine. Hey, Nick,
Nicholas.
how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good.
All right. Well, we're halfway done. If you want to jump into the watch together and watch along with us, that would be great. And you could provide some commentary. You could pause it with us, and we could try to figure out where this guy's coming from because we're just lost and confused why he's saying all these silly things. But that's usually...
Well, I can make assumptions, but that's rude.
Well, he says he's a teacher, I guess, of fiction, maybe fantasy fiction. I don't know, but it's a little disconcerting, but that's fine. You know, everyone has their own teaching style and methods and sensibilities and politics, of course. So we can't say he's completely lost the plot. So I just find it that he's so sensitive about this fictitious book about a bunch of races across a large geographic area fighting for control of their freedom. It seems pretty natural to me, but I guess racism is bad because orcs are painted as black. All right, we all good to go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's go.
There's any escaping that. There are well-intentioned rationalizations of such characterizations that might have convinced me 30 years ago. But let's be honest. Such characterizations in a book written in 2020 would at the very least be seen as insensitive and would most rightly be condemned.
Okay.
Or a...
Excuse me?
Yeah, but
Yeah, I'm assuming he's referring to the orcs and how Tolkien described them. And I don't understand why it's bad.
Okay, so let's take this for a different culture. Let's say if I base a fantasy creature that's pure evil based off of Vikings, like Viking berserkers, does that make me racist?
Of course,
where
but
we're
it
at?
also makes you based.
It's like does describing a man frothing at the mouth because he's consumed mushrooms as pure evil in his hatred for anything that moves. Is that me being a racist, or am I being an ally?
No. We have Norse mythology who had light elves and dark elves, and there's like one line describing that they're light-skinned and dark-skinned. Like, that's it. It's like that's all that Norse gave us. And we're like, okay, how can we work with that if we're retelling the story or reinventing a story? So, like, because there's so much content with Tolkien, he's like, well, if I were to read this today, I just couldn't forgive it. It's like, why? Imagine Tolkien was alive today and he's just invented Lord of the Rings. He wrote it today. And he has all this information on how evil the orcs are and how crazy the Uruk-hai are and how crazy Saruman is, like all this stuff. You're like, well, Saruman's the evil white man controlling all these puppets who are like the black man. And you're like, whoa.
Whoa!
Wait a second. Are you sure about that? Are you sure that there isn't some greater evil and Saruman's the real puppet and he should be looked as the victim and he's being tricked and like maybe he's being mind controlled? Like all these horrible things could be happening. We don't know. But no. Because the orcs are described as black and evil, therefore racism.
well, yeah, that gets to the root of the problem with this argument is, are those people today who would call it racist even right to begin with?
And if they are, what is the problem? Because if you're depicting the bad guys as evil, and you're saying they've got this dark skin and they're born out of the muck and they only care about killing and eating you, it's like that sounds pretty disgusting and scary. Like that's kind of the point. It doesn't mean, oh yeah, this is like the black race or this is like the brown race. Or,
These are Africans. No, nobody thinks like
no
that.
one's saying, no one ever put those two together. And I don't know why you would, unless you're thinking like a racist. So this is the problem I have. Like we talk about people talk about white privilege. As soon as you say that phrase to me, I'm thinking, so white people somehow, for whatever reason you think, are better than non-white people because they're privileged. And what the privilege is it could be, generations, it could be genetics, obviously it's genetics because it's color skin, right? But that includes money, that includes status, that includes all kinds of things. And it's like, who doesn't have that? It doesn't have to be color based. It could be just because you came from a certain family and your friend didn't. Like there's plenty of relationships I've had over the years with friends and what have you that were better off than me, worse off than me. And that's just life. Like there's nothing inherently good or bad about that. So
I'm just imagining this person going over to the black samurai, the black guy that became a samurai in Japan, and going, well, this is the power of the black skin that's giving him an unfair advantage compared to your average Japanese peasant. How fucking dare you, mister?
Oh boy, here's a food related question for no point whatsoever related to the topic. Vladimir, since you're halfway done, do you prefer grape or jelly or strawberry jelly on your PB&J sandwich? I'm a jam aficionado, so it really depends what mood I'm in. So I like them both, but we have a Saskatoon berry in Canada, which is a mix between a strawberry or a raspberry and a grape. It's actually really mild and nice. But I also have really good strawberry jam. So it depends what mood I'm in. It depends how good the peanut butter is, if it's crunchy, or if it's smooth, if it has any salt or sugar, if it's mixed. It depends if I have any rye bread or sourdough. There's all kinds of factors involved in my eating process. So I can't give you a straight answer. I do apologize. Anyway. Let us continue.
White, born in 1892, I would say that Tolkien was probably on the tolerant side. He was undeniably Eurocentric in his fiction. But as
Yeah,
an
very
athlete
obviously.
who grew up
Wow,
in
the
the
European
movement,
is
he also,
Eurocentric.
I think,
Just thought.
knew what it was to be a disempowered minority. I think he was a decent man with deep religious convictions that often led him to great honesty. But he was not immune to the common cultural assumptions of his era.
Such as?
I'd like to think that if somehow he could have lived longer, he might have even recognized some of the tropes he used and forwarded as having origins in racist and colonialist history.
Okay, this has been annoying me for the past 6 minutes. But
That's 6 minutes. Wow.
yeah, Kiefer, please make your point, then I'll.
No, go ahead. I'm actually interested.
Okay, he keeps talking about these colonialist ideals, right? These colonialist theories, and how he's Eurocentric and all this garbage. Look at his background. Look on his shelf. Does any of this look like something a normal European or European originated person, most of the white people in America, like any white person would normally have on their shelf?
No, maybe the fireplace.
we mentioned the this is a green screen or a blue screen. To me, it feels like it's a green screen. So he's just superimposing whatever he liked to make him look. I'm behind a fireplace. Blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, okay, sure. You're just filming yourself on your webcam or whatever, and putting whatever makes you look sophisticated.
You know what? Like, the most European thing about him is that he actually owns a house, supposedly from this image.
Well, if you're European, you would have artifacts from all over the world because you'd conquer most of the world.
Exactly! Those are fucking artifacts! Emblems of different cultures!
Yeah.
He is talking about how Tolkien is using these colonist theories in his fucking fantasy world, whilst he's talking in front of a fireplace that has shit that looks like it was ripped straight off an African tribe.
And if that's the case, exactly what is the problem of Tolkien using inspiration from Africa, from India, from wherever?
But he doesn't really. He just says like, oh well, skin color is a bit different. It's like, oh, so like there's like some features, like they come from the south, so like they look a bit different. Oh, that is so racist.
It's just, it drives me up a wall that he has the guts to talk about one of the greatest authors ever known, especially in the fantasy genre, about how he has colonialist ideals, a colonialist theory and all that bullshit.
Yeah.
Whilst if this is a green screen, he couldn't take a second to go, maybe this would make me look bad, because this looks kind of Indian, this one looks kind of South Arabian, or Saudi Arabian, the third one looks like kind of a fetish figure from Africa. Might not want to have that in the background to make a fucking trophy shelf.
Well, he didn't mention anything to do about his wartime and why he was inspired and influenced by his effects at war, why he was writing these books for his children in the first place, and what was the whole thrust of Tolkien's motivation. And if it has nothing to do with race or killing or hating the black man or whatever he's trying to get at here, where is he getting this from? What is the big problem with the orcs? Because I can create in my fantasy novel a series of beings which are pure evil or to be the enemy of the story, and they can look like all kinds of rainbow colored people. It doesn't really matter what I describe them as long as it makes sense that things that come out of the ground are the color of the ground. That's pretty logical. I don't have to like explain it to the reader that brown is brown or black is black, right? It just, when they come out of the ground, they're light blue and lavender. I was like, what brain fart did you have there, Smud, that caused to happen? Like, I have to explain that, why the color is the way it is. And Tolkien just goes, no, they're evil. And they're this way because they were created that way. And you're like, okay.
Well, that's the thing I keep seeing, is that a lot of people will call racism if you attribute characteristics normally attributed to certain races to evil characters. I don't know why that is, but
Well,
it's racist to make use those characteristics and call them ugly, I guess.
Yeah, I wish he would do that exactly, because just because the word black and the color black have the same name doesn't mean they're the same thing. Same with brown.
Well, also back to the whole Mongol thing where he was talking about like the flat noses and stuff.
Right.
And he was calling those ugly features. He's like, well, it's racist to call those ugly. Well,
Yeah.
That's not racist, that's racial for sure, because you're describing the actual appearance of a person. And if Tolkien likes flat noses or doesn't like flat noses, that's just his opinion. That's just an aesthetic. So good for Tolkien. Who cares what some old guy in a tweed jacket said about the evil character, or not even in the story, but in his notes where he's describing why he did that. He's I didn't like the Mongols or something. Like, oh, we don't like a conquering race? Okay. Oh, what a horrible person.
In the 74th note of 2573. Oh,
Yeah.
Christ. Imagine being so racist as to describe one of your evil races based on one of the most infamous conquering forces in human history. The gall of this fucking Brit.
Okay. Yeah, this is about as deep as this racism or colonialism argument goes. He hasn't described it. He hasn't said why it's bad. He doesn't say where it came from and how Tolkien is using it. He's just saying colonialism, he should have known better. And you're like, where? How? Who? What? Where did this begin in his writing that we can connect the dots? Because you can't just say sexism and point to, well, look at Merry, Pippin, and all these other guys. They're all guys. You're like, you mean you want the girls to go on the quest to risk their lives? I mean, we could. Why?
They're all white.
They're all white.
Well, then that's gotta be the other half of this movie.
Yeah. Where are the girls with this glamdring and all these other swords that they could use? Like, I don't know.
Oh
Well, another thing with this argumentation is the whole like colonialism in itself is racist. When I think there was bad things that happened in colonialism, of course, but like colonialism itself isn't racist.
Okay.
You go.
You don't have to exploit the native people to colonialize a place.
Okay, let's keep going. Here's Vladimir again. Tolkien would slap this guy and tell him to shut up. There would be some rude comments from this fellow, and Tolkien would be like, okay, you say so. I've written, like, he would explain all the nuances of his characters and his setting, and it would be a good hour conversation of just Tolkien just explaining things to this fellow, because he'd love to talk about his work. Vladimir again. This guy looks like he unironically enjoys Gollum.
He probably sympathizes with Gollum.
Yeah, that's interesting, because Gollum is a fallen elf, right? So, or sorry, a fallen hobbit.
There you go.
He's not talking about the character. He's talking about the game that came out recently.
Oh.
Let's not bring that up. That's even more unnecessary effort. But yeah, no, Gollum, what happens to when an elf goes bad or when a hobbit goes bad? What the ring does to people? Like, that's like, these are all warnings. Like, don't be like this. This is you're going to become an obsessed freak who's a slave to a drug, like a drug-like thing. That is very clear to me when I read of Gollum. I was like, oh, okay, this guy was like using the ring as like this drug he had to keep using to survive, or whatever he thought it was.
In fact, like, from the humans, Boromir is like the best example of like what can go wrong if you get too greedy for power.
Yeah, and he saves himself.
Yeah, he saves himself by the end, but like he was so close to falling to just like this power hunger that he had for the ring. Like his pride was his undoing, but like that is like such a beautiful message that like even the good guys can just fall for this bullshit. That
message is a lot more important. The temptation of power and what it can do to you is way more important in a war setting than some of the enemy is dark skinned.
That's why I don't believe that Lord of the Rings is racist, because like the supposed white savior people are still depicted that like they are just fallible to these simple things as well. Like they aren't invincible, to say the least.
I mean, technically, other than the elves and the in Gandalf, the humans are the most corruptible.
Yeah. Like I did read the book like a few months ago, and like there were several races of men that were corrupted by Sauron and Saruman as well. But so it's not just like all of them versus the orcs. It's pretty one way of looking at this book, supposedly as like the biggest fan of that. I think this guy is a fake fan. That's all I'm saying.
All right.
Also, there are 0 female characters in The Hobbit.
Oh.
And, the representation of women in Lord of the Rings is idealized and minimal. Now,
So we worship goddesses who are female, elven goddess. There's all these other like Tom Bombadil's
Even-
wife is a goddess.
Even
What about
dwarves don't
Eowyn?
even for a second consider striking down this beautiful fair elf, despite saying that he hates elves and would wipe them from the face of the earth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But when he sees a fucking elf woman, he's like, oh.
yeah. And if one of them dies, he'd be like, "Oh, this is clearly female hatred and misogyny." And you're like, "Oh, here we go." Like what would make this guy happy? Nothing's going to appease him. Yeah.
He does
Army-
really-
What about Eowyn, by the way? Like, did he
I was
completely
about to bring
forget
up
about it?
Eowyn.
Eowyn is like such a fucking good character, like both the book and the movie.
Yeah, there are
Like-
reasons why women are not in war, but there are exceptions, and Eowyn's a good example. And I think she doesn't break the prophecy of who's going to kill the Nazgul fellow.
The Witch King, yeah.
So it's like, oh, this is a clever little thing that no one was really contemplating, because we're talking about a final blow or any blow.
Yeah, but like she needed the assistance of Mary to
Yeah.
accomplish that. Like she couldn't do that alone.
So the Witch King wasn't felled by a man; it was felled by a hobbit and a woman.
Yeah, a halfling and a woman. Yeah.
And it never accounted for threesomes.
Yeah, and this is totally fine. There's nothing like the fact that there's no women in war, or very, very few, is like, yeah, it makes perfect sense, because we didn't have that in 1910 and 1920 with the First World War. We didn't have that issue, because we would not put women into dangerous scenarios because we're not stupid and they're not stupid.
We still had common sense back then.
Yeah. And this guy's like, where are all the women in this story about a war? It's like, they're not at war.
Yeah. I can't wait for that supposed like new spin-off for Lord of the Rings, which shows Lord of the Rings from the female perspective. That just gotta be like them in the kitchen.
Discrimination.
I want like a culinary spin-off for Lord of the Rings, and that's exactly what I'm gonna get from that. Finally know how to make that good weed.
Oh boy. Anyway.
to the nitty gritty of this argument. It's been done. And I'm not really a fan of slapping labels on anyone unless there's an
He's looking at the
But
script.
when women and people of color tell
I
me
hate that
that
fucking
they find the
thing.
representation or the lack thereof to be disturbing and hurtful,
Okay,
Oh, no.
what did he just say? Give me a
Disturbing?
second.
Not in this book. It hurts me.
Yeah.
Hang on. Was that what you really just said?
Yeah.
but when and people of color tell me that they find the representation or the lack thereof to be disturbing and hurtful, I want to have the grace and the wisdom and the humility to listen.
And what are you gonna hear?
Fuck you! Genuinely,
You don't have to-
shove
you
the
don't have
fish
to-
up your own ass.
You don't have to listen to everybody, because not everybody needs to be listened to.
No, look at the
imagine.
face he's making right now. This is the most condescending. He is such a condescending cunt.
Yeah. Who cares who these people are? The argument is, well, there's no female black women in this story, And I am so high and mighty in the ethical ladder here. I'm going to listen and nod my head and hold their hand and make it's okay. Tolkien was a bad
You should listen
person.
to your gaslighter who says you doing things that you don't intend to hurt them is you intending to hurt them and means you hate them. Definitely.
If you read a book and you are offended, awesome. That's an amazing book. You must have read a really good story that got you so riled up. And if your reasoning is, well, there weren't any women, I mean, that's hilarious, but that's still an amazing book that had such an impact on your fragile little psyche that the writer didn't account for black people in his fantasy novel where women don't go to war and there were no black people. Like, what is wrong with I don't see, like, if it was written by an African guy and there's no white guys in his fantasy novel, I'd be like, this makes perfect sense. He's coming from his own perspective. Why would I expect him to see white guys in a story about a bunch of black tribes or whatever fighting each other? It would make no sense. And this guy has his moral superiority.
I have been like watching, like reading manga, and I'm like, where are all the white people?
You don't understand. Asians or white people, depending on what day it is.
It's funny because I was about to mention about like ubiquitous characters in anime and manga. I don't think there's maybe one or two mangas that have a character who is a slightly dark skinned, and it's just because it's cheaper to make on a manga because it's less ink, and that costs a lot of money to print out a fully dark skinned character. And it's always usually a captured demon soldier who ends up becoming a main character, and they might have darker skin, but that's it. It's simple. It's an enemy. And it has nothing to do with racism, even though they might have like, oh, well, the humans hate the demon kind or the dragon kind or something like that. It's like, oh, cool, racism, awesome. Let's play with that for a while. And then the hero's like, well, I don't care. I'll accept you as my comrade. And that usually happens in these stories. So it's like, we don't care what color the heroes are or the villains are. It just makes sense because it's manga. It's cheaper to do it that way, not because we need a story of all black heroes. It doesn't. If it was light based, if the color spectrum was the subtractive model as opposed to the additive model, then we'd all be reading it online. It would technically be cheaper because it's black, meaning the light is not being used on your LCD, so you're using less electricity, I guess. And you would I like this black character story because it doesn't hurt my eyes as much, I guess. I don't know what the argument would be. So
this sounds like a Marx lens, if I've ever heard one.
Yeah.
It's basing the art off of which one is cheaper.
Yeah, it's if it's ink, it's more expensive. If it's light, it's less expensive. Exactly. Yeah. Anyway. That was my weird take, but yeah, this guy is acting like a creepy professor, like, oh, come after class, I'll talk to you about racism and sexism, blah, blah, blah.
Inside my room, of course.
You have the right to say what you have on your mind, but I'm not gonna listen.
Yeah, and I think
I'm gonna do something about the story that exists.
This is a great quote from Legacy. I'm not trying to slap labels, but I'm going to. Like, he just used labels at the start of his video.
Fucking hypocrite.
Like, yeah, you just called colonialism and all this other junk, and you're like, oh my god, it's not a label, buddy. All right. Anyway.
And it really goes way beyond Tolkien. There were writers in the 80s and the 90s and even beyond using the same tropes without questioning them.
Be specific. Was it him mentioning the Mongols? Was it him comparing to one of the most infamous raiders of all time?
Yeah.
That was the racist element. Is it just because he doesn't have enough women in his work?
Also, again, you have to prove that the tropes are bad to prove that using them is bad.
Yeah. And he talked about writers in the 80s. How about Sapkowski's The Witcher? He has all kinds of women who are the only, well, there are a few wizards, but they're mostly females who have all the magical power, political power. They're doing all the dirty deeds. So, I mean, yes, there are some authors who had a more female-centric story. There's Red Sonja in what's his name? Conan. Like, there's all these wonderful characters in fantasy that have their time to shine are our main characters. So, like, I give an example of Terry Brooks all the time because that's the one I know. And there are dying wizards. Magic is rare, and elves are kind of rare as well. There's some female elves, but there's plenty of women. There's plenty of men. I mean, it depends why that setting is the way it is, and why women are what they're doing, because they need more babies. They're running out of elves, so yeah, we got to have some more women. That explains the next few books where they have all these kids, and it's like generations later. So that's why they had the women and the men, so they can keep procreating and keep magic alive. That's by design. If it was a weird magical race where they only had one gender, then that would be that, and who cares? And what would be the argument there? Oh, they have no women in their stories. Like they're one gender. There is no women. There are no men. It's just they procreate magically. Like who cares? So it's like you can't get beyond this ideology that does not belong where it should be in the analysis of fantasy genre. Okay.
My point is that good people, even geniuses like Tolkien, who clearly hated overt theory.
He's not gonna give you examples. Brilliant, like
he's a brilliant.
Because like he was like ragging about like 80s and 90s, and like there's zero evidence for that. I hate these gaff video essayists.
I really hated Hitler, but man, he could paint a really good portrait. Oh, okay.
Mm.
And racial superiority can fail to question the powerful and underlying assumptions of their culture and time.
Why would you expect a writer of fantasy for his kids who came from war and is teaching at, I can't remember which university, to start questioning all this nonsense that was not even a factor to think about because he's got a life? And
here's the thing. This was his job. He studied cultures, he studied traditions, and he studied how these cultures and artifacts and art changes move through cultures. He was the peak expert on this exact thing. And this guy is coming in telling the guy who spent his entire life studying this shit, oh, well, actually, that's kind of offensive.
He's telling it to the guy who was teaching at Oxford as a professor.
The linguist.
Yeah.
Why can't the linguist and study of history question patterns in fantasy that haven't existed yet? That he's
whenever they accuse him and like Joseph Campbell of being racist, that's so hilarious.
This is silly because what do you expect this guy to be? Like this supreme writer of all fantasy, and I will dictate, oh, well, don't worry, because I know what racism and colonialism is and how that could impact 100 years from now of sensitive retards who can't read the words on the page properly and interpret it to mean that I'm a bad person or something. Like, no, he writes exactly what he wanted based on his intelligence and his imagination for his kids, based also on his religious upbringing and his war experiences. That's it. That's all it has to be. He could have added all kinds of other things, and he did, like music and food and dancing and all other cultural elements of the world of Mordor. So good for Tolkien. And this guy, well, why couldn't he also have studied social sciences like I have in the past, 7 or 15 years that it's been a political rush in my life? It's like, well, he didn't give a shit. Nor should he have, because he's his own person and he had better things to do than think of what the world would have been like 90 years from now or whatever the case was. If I was evaluating like E&M Banks or Arthur C. Clarke, I would evaluate him for science fiction concepts that they tried to introduce and did so poorly when they should have known better. That's what I would have done. I would not have said, well, they included politics where they shouldn't have. It's like, no, they can include any kind of social element. I don't really give a shit. Does the science make sense? I'm reading it for the science fiction, not for the political commentary. That's like icing. It's like, oh, wow, a nice little anecdote or element that gives it flavor. But other than that, I don't. Like, even if you got it like, oh my God, this guy's for the Fourth Reich. I don't. Okay, weird. Adds flavor to my science fiction. I would not read too much into that.
It's like reading history. The spiciest stuff usually makes you go, oh, Okay, that's an interesting opinion you had there.
Yeah, that's why when what's her name, Sister Act, black lady actress who's on The View, was saying, "Well, World War II is not about the black or without the Jews. It was about all of humanity." And you're like, "No, it was about the Jews. They wanted to eradicate the Jews."
Goldberg.
Whoopi
Oh, wait.
Goldberg. Yeah, when she said that stupid thing.
It's Whoopi something because I forgot her last name's not her last name.
Whoopi. It's not Goldberg. Oh, you're right.
Because she said it wasn't her actual name.
Yeah, she changed it because she wouldn't be a good comedian if she didn't. Yeah, when she said something as dumb and ignorant as that, I mean, even children were like, "Are you serious?" Every time you bring up the Holocaust, it's always about the 8 million Jews that died. And yes, other people were killed as a result of war, but they were targeted specifically. It was about them. It was in all of Hitler's letters, all of Himmel's letters, all these characters. It was in his book. I mean, it's clear as day. So, yeah, for people to say
There are a bunch of other people in the crosshairs, and those are in his books as well. But the Jews get such a high mention because they were mentioned all the fucking time, for better and for worse. Usually worse.
Yeah. So it's kind of like you're missing the forest for the trees if you just say that. Oh, or if you're on such a high horse and you just say, "Well, the Jews are humans too." It's like, yes, many people aside from the Jews who were human also died, but mostly the target was about the Jews. So anyway, let's not.
Actually, if we can go back to the Mongolian comparison that this guy has made with Lord of the Rings, it's even more apparent because just now I remember the beginning of the book that all of the dwarves and the elves have told that they got a visit by a Nazgul, that Sauron expects them that they're gonna join their army, or else they're gonna storm their lands, to the Lonely Mountain and all those other areas. And it's kind of the strategy that the Mongolians were doing, that they send a messenger that you can give up your land or I will just conquer you. So maybe that can also play into this, but these are not admirable traits at all.
Yeah, I think they're
getting just perfectly playing into it.
They're getting caught up on the etymology of the word black and dark, and associating that with, well, we use that word, and not understanding the difference between sense, the sensical, intelligible understanding and definitions of the word, and the reference to what it's pointing to. And this is a classic philosophical problem with, I think Gottlieb Frege brought up, sense and reference.
Mm.
And it's such a simple thing that because it's sensibility, I don't think it's his sensibility. I honestly just think it's the ideology. And in university, everyone's a left-leaning weirdo, and that he keeps hearing it, so he believes in it. And I'm a liberal too. Blah blah blah. I understand what you're going through, and yeah, black people are oppressed, and all this jazz.
I can't wait for Gimli to call one of the orcs swine-eyed.
Yeah, the dwarves are all good. Okay. Anyway, let's keep going.
Those that privilege them. People are messy,
Privilege.
complex, and contradictory, and conflicted, and we can change. Ironically, that is a message that is quite prominent in Lord of the Rings. I mentioned Ursula Le Guin earlier, who is I consider a great feminist fantasy writer.
But there is a story like that in Lord of the Rings. But I forgot what the horse tribe is called in the Rohirrim. Was that their name? The ones that mountain horses.
Rohan.
Never mind. Rohan, yeah. So they come across this more nomadic human tribe, and they need their help to get back at go to Gondor because they are late and they need to have an ambush on the orcs. They befriend these people even though they used to be working for Sauron. So there is a story about change, and Tolkien wrote about this. If that is not one of the evidence that he believes that everyone can get along as long as the goal is common good, then I don't know what it is. What the fuck is this man doing?
Yeah.
Can he read the book?
Yeah, he brought up. I love talking about this because this is the classic example they bring up is Ursula K. Le Guin, And she wrote one of the best known books in science fiction, which was The Left Hand of Darkness, which is a series. Like, it was just one of many. And in that, she depicts a genderless race. And for whatever reason, feminists said, "Oh, wow,
All right.
you did this amazing feminist piece of work." And she's like, "I did?" Because she was also a feminist and she knew what she was doing, and she's not stupid. But when you're depicting a genderless race, and you're a writer, you're like, "I know exactly what I'm doing. What are you talking about?" So
Yeah, exactly. And in science fiction of all places.
yeah, and so, that's why I also gave the previous example of a mono-gendered species. So it's a great book, but it's not because it's a great feminist book. It's a great because it's good science fiction. It's an interesting spin on what happens to that kind of species. Anyway, I recommend people checking it out just because it's an easy read. Here is Legacy. Thank you again. Since Mark mentioned these people ragging the 90%, compare Peter David's run of the Hulk of the 90s to Jessica Drew vomiting acid today. It's clear. Oh, Peter David, what a guy. He's done everything from the 80s to the 90s. I mean, comic books, short stories, novellas, Star Trek, Star Wars. I think he's done everything he can get his hands on. He is that good. He's not the best writer I've ever read, but he can pump them out like you would not believe. So yeah,
Which is often more important.
he knows his audience. Yeah, and all the good Star Trek novels are by him. And I don't really like Star Trek novel or novellas because they're kind of cheesy, but they're not bad when Peter David does them. So anyway, check out Peter David as well. Geez, I'm just giving off all these recommendations. Oh, geez.
Expressed regret. Fantasy, a Wizard of Earthsea, largely ignored women. As always in history.
Unless you went to a female university or post-secondary education that we learned about from learning about Joseph Campbell. That's great.
It's the actions of some courageous people to challenge deep and powerful cultural assumptions.
Look, I know you can personally feel bad about it, but what's wrong with not having the other gender really appear that much in your story, if that's what you want to do?
Yeah. Or
Exactly. Why do we have to limit our story down to these checklists, pretty much?
or
Like,
Do
plus,
we have a strong woman?
I don't think you would ever see someone say the opposite either. You wouldn't have someone say, "I really wish this story that focused entirely on women had more men in it." At least,
Yep.
if you did, you'd get fucking criticized to hell and back.
yeah, but even then, it's not enough just to have the women. They have to do the women argument or the female argument. They have to be talking about themselves and problems that women would have had in those days, or whatever the hell this guy's
And
sensibility.
they can't talk about men
Oh, they're gonna use the Bechdel
wanting to love men.
Yeah, all that silly gauge. Like, we're talking about 3 giant books by Tolkien that he wrote, and people would say, "Well, where's all the women?" Well, there are women in there, but the story isn't about female issues or sensibilities or trying to bring up the 1920s and what women were going through. It's a fantasy novel in a fantasy setting about war. And
Well, this brings me back to, I know a lot of people don't like it, but back when Final Fantasy 15 was coming out and people found out the cast was going to be 4 dudes.
Yeah.
And people were like, "What about the woman?" And the writer was like, "Well, I wanted to focus the story about a group of guys, because guys are different when they're just with dudes."
Yeah, and you may not like the boy band setting of even like the Gundam Wing series and Gundam 00, but that also appeals to girls, and some girls prefer those Gundam series just because of that, as opposed to the ones about war and fighting and killing. So women like the same stuff as guys or as men do. So it's really about what does this group of people really have a problem with and why? And will that help the writing be any better if you had Galadriel be a general or something and she had an army of female archers or whatever. Like, would that really add to the story? Maybe.
We saw that from Rings of Power that definitely does not appeal to any audiences.
And nobody has a problem with things like Totally Spies or Charlie's Angels, where the main cast is 3 women, or stuff like Final Fantasy X too, where it's the girls, all of them.
That was experimental. If ever I saw a Final Fantasy that actually kind of worked, I played it for the first hour and I was like, "This is fun. It's weird but fun." And I wanted to play it more. I didn't get the chance to, but
Can you play Blitzball in 10 too?
I don't think so.
I don't think it is in there. 'Cause
Damn.
Final Fantasy X-2 is like an idle thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like Final Fantasy V.
It's so
on crack.
Japanese.
You're changing jobs like on the fly. It's nuts. It's like, what am I doing? I'm a gunner. No, I'm an idol. Now I'm a sword master. Like, oh my god. So it's fun, but it's very different than all the other Final Fantasies. Okay, 8 minutes in, doing okay.
Us kind of totter along behind those people, often resisting such shifts in perspective. So, what now? Well, for one, I believe that fantasy needs diversity.
Oh boy.
And
No, it doesn't.
No,
The
doesn't.
story doesn't
No.
need to like have it like check boxes like, oh, we need to reach a certain level of diversity. No, we don't. We don't need it. Not all stories need that.
Also, these stories do have diversity. It's just diversity you don't like.
Yeah, just because of the skin color, like he regards all of them white.
Just
Be
because
honest.
it doesn't have a bunch of black people in it. That's it.
His
Ah,
unknown definition of diversity.
Eurocentric.
Yeah, his unknown definition.
Well,
of,
this isn't diverse. Literally, they have all different races here.
yeah,
One
well,
person of each race.
with fantasy and sci-fi, you create an alien species. You're like, well, what does this represent? An alien species? I don't know. What are you talking about? Like, I just want to have cool. Like, even as fantasy, an alien to me is like non-human, so it doesn't really matter. So you
Yeah.
have a species with 3 arms or what. I was like, whoa, that's wild. And they're not biped; they're quadruped. Like, oh my god, like that's cool. I don't need to affiliate that with, I don't know, some tribe in Africa that walk on 4 legs. Like, I don't. Need,
I mean, that still makes the group in the setting diverse.
it's different. It's
'Cause
non-human.
They'll have diverse ideals because of the cultures you give them.
Oh yeah, you could get a completely human-looking species that have completely different social constructions and hierarchies, and like that's what the culture series is. It's pretty much space communism with the
I
lithium.
mean, that also gets back to that whole argument that white people aren't diverse, but there's tons of white cultures with different ideas.
Oh yeah, it's fascinating because when you have these ideas of, well, the culture series has to keep expanding and we want to survive, and then all of a sudden they come across an artifact. I can't remember what it's called. It's been a while since I read this, but they're basically planet-sized air bubbles, and no one knows what they're for, and some unknown alien race just made them, and it's like, you could fit an entire species in there, and they're like, yeah, but why were they made? Like, we have no idea. So there's all this wonderful juxtaposition of, here's the ideal, here's the thing that we're striving for, and then, oh well, here's this alien species that already did that billions of years ago, and they're a mystery. They're gone. Like, why did they abandon this concept? Like, it's there to give the audience this sort of like, whoa, we are tiny. We're insignificant compared to what has come before us and what that means. And it's one of those things that a lot of sci-fi does. Not so much fantasy, but science fiction has a habit of like, here's this giant spaceship that comes out of nowhere, and it's got all this technology and holograms and things that we're on the cusp of becoming, and it's empty. It's just a big ghost town. And you're like, what is this giant ring world for? And we don't even need to know the answer because the mystery is so compelling. That's a whole story. And there's
Well,
go ahead.
a lot of fantasy actually does have that ancient, super advanced race that
Right.
disappeared for no reason.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very well-known trope. Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, we can do all these wonderful things, and to me, that is much, much more compelling than reducing it to, well, we got the token black elf, we got the tall dwarven bow person who hates dwarven culture because they're rejected by their society. Like, we don't need that anymore. It's boring, and I don't care for it. I want the most idealistic elf. I want like I want the writer to give me the perfect everything in their brain. That would be...
I want the twinkiest twink elf.
Yeah.
And the broadest, broliest fucking dwarf you can give me.
Yeah. I want
that. Is something I also see a lot. A lot of times in this name of bringing in a lot of diversity, they'll have people who like are a race, but they disavow like the culture of that race.
Oh yeah.
And that just makes things less diverse because they usually disavow it for the kind of mainstream human culture, I guess you would call it.
Oh yeah, that I remember in Terry Brooks, a lot of the magicians are dead or they've gone away, and the only ones that are still around have either gone off the beaten path, so they avoided whatever catastrophe, but they were like the weird magicians. They were using like science. So I can't remember the guy's name, but he was using like pouches of explosives with magic to cause bombs or whatever. And he was saying magic is so chaotic. I need something more reliable. So he was using alchemy and various other elements to make weapons. So that is like the great setup for a character who is a rebel and they're still alive, and because of his rebellion or because of his differences, he's alive to tell a tale, and he's the last of his kind, and now he's on a quest to bring back his lost culture and peoples. And to me, that's more compelling, and I don't give a shit what color they are, how tall they are, male, female. It's all that's just icing. That's all just like a nice thing to have on top. So, all right. Whew. Almost done with this guy. Well, at least philosophically, I think he's exhausted his ideas.
Readers and writers of fantasy should embrace it.
Why?
Where we find it.
Why?
To my friends who still subscribe to the historical accuracy argument, I do
What
have
is
something
that?
to say. Let me just briefly explain the historical accuracy argument, which simply states that it doesn't make sense to portray non-white people in medieval-inspired settings because they didn't exist.
That's retarded. Whoever... Is that even a thing? I don't even think...
He's referring to historical works, or works based on historical periods in European history. For example, Kingdom Come Deliverance.
Okay.
That got dragged through the mud because they didn't depict black people.
Yeah.
So that's revisionist history then.
Damn those Polish people.
They're just making shit up. I thought he was referring to fantasy novels where you could literally do whatever you want. So I'm like, okay. That's
Well, his argument doesn't stand by itself, so he needs to like bullshit his way out of this.
Yeah, that's a completely different genre, sir.
But he doesn't care. He's reached the point where he needs to argue that, but what if it's a case in which it's based on European history? Then why should I have a black person show up? Those guys didn't show up much out of Africa.
My favorite English historical event is when the hobbits crossed the river, the channel, I mean.
Well, I mean, this also does apply to things like The Witcher, where while it's totally a fantasy setting, it's clearly based off of a historical period.
Oh, yeah.
Sure, yeah. But it's mostly an inspiration, though. Like that's where like the entire story was like starting out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fine. I'm not offended by like Polish authors doing Polish folklore or Tolkien being British, and it's like I don't need to know his backstory. I don't need to know his motivations. I don't need to know that he's a PhD in this or like it's good. Like I like that Asimov had a PhD in chemistry, but it's like when you read his books, you're like, oh, this guy clearly knew science. There's no way you could have had these ideas if you didn't study for at least 4 years or somewhere. And
really,
if we follow what this guy wants, we just get what the Witcher show was, where like every other character
that's
is black.
exactly his vision. Like,
and
the rings of power
it takes
too.
you out of it immediately because you just don't buy the setting anymore.
Mm.
Yeah, we want interesting, compelling characters, not tokenization, which is strange, especially in the show. I don't know what's happening.
We want intriguing characters, not just white guy, black man.
Okay, we are at 9 minutes.
This could have all been avoided if Tolkien would have been open about like the orcs were inspired by French people.
There is the hobbits on the menu, boys. Okay.
The menu.
Like, spaghetti is back at the menu.
I have a nice 45 to go with that. Oh, I do too. Okay, we'll make a nice flambe. Okay, good.
I want
What's wrong with
I want the French orcs now. That's hilarious.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Every single time orcs speak, that you just like talking French.
Bonjour, mes amis.
When they raid, it's literally the battle cry.
Monsieur
Bonjour.
Saruman. They brought these hobbits to here.
Have you seen the hobbits? Yes, we have seen the hobbits. They're over there. They're beautiful. We're just relaxing.
And it's like one of the orcs is actually like the French guard from Monty Python's Holy Grail.
Oh yeah, we have them already. We have them in the back. Don't worry. Oh,
We have the One Ring. Why do you have it?
What
you have
about
hobbits?
them? What about them? They're fresh.
They actually believe that I have the hobbits.
All right.
What's wrong with sexism if that's how things were back in those times? So I know this argument pretty well because I used to believe in it. My response now is, well, it's fantasy, not historical fiction. So if you can have...
This is yeah.
If the setting is gonna have sexism, it's gonna have sexism.
Yeah, if he's making the same fallacy that because of my sensibilities are more important than Tolkien's at the time, even though Tolkien was using his sensibilities to write his books. It's silly.
Yeah.
You have
And
no...
Also, portrayal of it is not advocacy of it. If you portray sexism, it doesn't mean you're sexist.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like all the examples, Berserk. Like how many like sex scenes there are, like rape scenes. Like if they weren't there, like the story wouldn't mean as much because like the world isn't that harsh without them.
And this is where we get to the nitpicky nature of this sort of argument because it's like there's no women. Okay, what if there were women? Oh, they're not doing this. Okay, well we'll have them do this. Oh, now you're making the women weak. It's like we can't have them be Mary Sue's. They have to be weak. They have to grow. It's like, well, you're killing women. You're being misogynistic. It's like, well, what the hell do you want? And this is the problem. There's no actual criteria for what is this idealized female feminist bullshit when there was no need. Like, this is not even a power fantasy. There's no men like, oh, we're going to destroy the orcs. There are rallies, there are cries for battle, and there are some cool moments, but pretty much everyone gets beaten up. People die. They lose men and women or men throughout the entire story. Frodo nearly loses his mind. So, I mean, it's war. It's not supposed to be a power fantasy specifically. And to throw in elements that don't belong there, I'm just like, dude, like you can't just put everything into a pot to make your stew and hope for the best. It doesn't work that way. Okay.
I mean, you absolutely can, but at that point, you gotta realize that what you're making is gonna sound fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
And if you remove these things, you remove any kind of like harsh edge to the setting. It's not gonna be interesting. Yeah,
and once you start, like I was playing a video game, I'm doing a video on it, and they have a lot of tropes from manga and anime, which are when I listed them all, it sounded ridiculous. But because they're broken down per chapter, it's like, oh, here's the twist. And it's that kind of twist that you see in this kind of story. And that's it.
Like let's say you have a setting. You remove any sexism or anything. But it's still not really common for females to be knights. But you have this female be a knight.
Right.
One interesting conflict you could have is how people don't want her to be a knight because she's a woman. But if you remove that sexism, you don't have that anymore. You completely remove a conflict that could have been really interesting.
And that's a specific element of that character in that setting, which deals with her character as a person. As opposed
That's the thing I see a lot. That's the thing I see a lot in these is they'll also still act like that sexism is there when it's not.
Right. And this goes to the nature of having a established character in an established setting, as opposed to, let's say, the author doing a lot of misogynistic jokes in the dialogue because the language of the people of the town use. And they're like, oh, this is a horrible setting because everyone's making these sexual jokes every 2 pages. You're like, well, that's just the secondary, tertiary characters filling in the blanks of like people walking through the market, and you hear this chatter. So there's going to be some sensibilities that you're like, why did they do that? Like, you get this in Game of Thrones all the time. Why there's so much swearing and tits and killing? And to the guys, we're like, this is entertainment. This is world
Because
building.
George R. R. Martin is 13 years old mentally.
And that works for some people. Some of us are like, whatever, it's it's just the dirty world he created. And some of us are like, well, we didn't need that. It didn't really add too much. Some characters who were prostitutes or went to prostitutes, that makes perfect sense, and certain episodes would require that. But then there's these guys who are like, well, you can't have prostitutes. It's like, yeah, you should have prostitutes. What culture didn't have prostitutes? So it makes perfect sense. But to disregard or say, well, the prostitutes have to have a strong, independent female who's in charge, you're like, whoa, slow down there. How is that plot?
And the prostitutes can't be shamed for being prostitutes either.
You can't have the local wench. That's just insensitive.
Because sex work is real work.
I want strong characters. I want weak characters. I want a gamut. If you're going to tell a story like Lord of the Rings or George R. R. Martin stuff, and there's dozens and dozens of characters, you want a range. You don't just want everyone's amazing. Everyone has this background that's crazy and powerful females and powerful men and dynasties. It's like, oh my God, give me like I've read dumb Korean and Chinese manga that it's like that. And it's just, I'm the best. All my children are the best. All my students are the best. And here's a rival. Oh, I crushed him under my thumb. It's just like, oh my God, this is nauseous. This is disgusting. Who wants to read this garbage? It has nothing to do with race and sexism. It's just power tripping on balls. It's just no one can possibly care about this crap. So anyway, back to this wonderful guy and his criteria for what makes a good story.
Magic and dragons, and I'm pretty sure those aren't historical. Why can't you have some black and brown?
They are based off of historical myth, though. Again, like, just because you add in these things that aren't real doesn't mean you have to add in other things that weren't real as well.
It's the fucking so you're happy with dragons, but you're not happy with my fucking Nissan car from 2013.
He moved the goalpost from genre about historical fiction to back to fantasy. And you're like, dude, we saw what you did there. Why don't you have lesbians and homosexuals and trannies? Like, here we go.
I think he was always talking about fantasy. He's just talking about the whole, like, The Witcher argument. Why can't The Witcher have a bunch of black people running around? Well, because it's based off of, like, 15th century Poland.
Yeah.
Well developed, or how about a world without misogyny? And there are many.
Why? Why would I want that?
That is just like a clean-cut world that is so
Okay, you
boring.
might not want to take that out of context.
No. It's fiction. I want the most conflict I can get out of a page or two.
I know. That's why I said out of context, because that sounds really fucking funny. A world without sexism, and you immediately go, why would I want that?
Yeah. I want a book with
He's
sexist androids raping each other and baking bread, thinking they're going to be the next top chef.
Wait, how do androids rape the robots?
I don't know, but I want to find out, and that's why we read stories like that.
They're not human beings. They don't have rights.
Well, maybe these androids do, and maybe there's gynoids that are in war with them, and they're like, "You're disgusting," and we're the androids that we get along with the rest of our humanity, and they've been fighting this year-long war about becoming citizens of the republic or whatever. Like, I want conflict. Give me all the ideas you got, and let's go with that. Let's get a really a hick like android who's been around for 1,000,000 years, and he just hates all those non inorganic androids. You know, all those hybrids, those disgusting hybrids. Like, give me that. I want to read a story about androids that are racist and against the females and the males and all that jazz. That'd be great.
I mean, also, you want to make a setting without human racism. Go ahead. Maybe the human races don't care about skin color anymore because the orcs are over there, and they're way different than us.
Yeah, look at Nier Automata. Everyone's like, we are doing this for humanity. Everything is going to be great once we eliminate all the enemies of humanity. And by the way, humanity's dead. There's no humans left. We have no idea where they are. And it's sad.
That's what Shadowrun does too. Like, Shadowrun, nobody cares that anyone's fucking black anymore or anything. They're more busy being racist against orcs and trolls.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you have a cyberpunk reality and you get some schmuck in the back going, well, I hate all those Jews. You're like, what? This guy for real? I'm getting my brain downloaded by kung fu movies. I can kick your ass 13 different ways, but you're concerned about skin tone. All right. Sure. Like that would be like a comic relief in a genre that doesn't really have that sort of character anymore. So
non-media things too, of course. But even more important, the historical accuracy argument is actually inaccurate.
Okay, then why were you talking about colonialism back in the day and how it's bad if that is not or is historically accurate to Tolkien's time period? This is silly. This is like, I want my potentially historically accurate data or my modern ethics where it shouldn't belong.
Is he going to bring up like one or two black people might have migrated to Europe or something, and that means it's A-okay to have hundreds of black people running around?
Every third guy you see on the streets of Bohemia in the 14th century should just be a black guy that looks like he walked out of Africa. A Viking ancestor.
Yeah, this is kids complaining, why can't, back in the day, Mass Effect 2, he play as a Hanar. Like, why couldn't we do that? It's like, it's a trilogy, and he's not the main character. And why couldn't we have a Hanar squad mate? Because it's too complicated, and it's not necessary, and they didn't think about it. Well, the storytelling sucks. It's like, well, I mean, you can't get everything you want. I mean, it's not a big deal. Do we really need a Hanar going around saying, oh, Chosen, we should go to the homeworld and get weapons? And they're like, what? No, we don't need some goofy jellyfish telling us shit. Get on with the story. Hurry up. We don't need to explore every single species because we can. That's dumb. Like, do we have to explore every single character and their background? We learn a lot, and Merry and Pippin are just kids. They're just there along for the ride, and they have a friendship, but we don't need to know who their uncles were and their aunts were and all their background information.
Although Tolkien would be happy to tell you, I'm sure.
He would have to tie it into what they were doing at the time, like with the Ents, and they were getting chased and all that jazz. But you couldn't just stop the entire pacing and just start talking about what life was like back in the Shire. It's too much. Although, again, you're right, Tolkien might even consider that because he writes so much.
Remember, he made...
It was like back in the Shire, read The Hobbit. There's tons of it in there.
Yeah, remember, if you want to go down to the Rohirrim, or not the Rohirrim, excuse me, the Easterling, the Rune. If you want to go down to the Rune, you need to go down to the Winery Empire. And he made an entire lineage for those guys, spanning like 50 different kings. And we never see those guys. From what I remember, they're talked about, but I don't remember them actually showing up.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember all the people who got power, rings of power. What they call it, like went to 3 of the elven kings or elven leaders. There were 9 humans or whatever. I can't remember how many there were, and all the wars that came about and all the deaths.
The Darwinian, that was the guys.
Yeah. Anyway.
are increasingly finding how diverse the Middle Ages actually were. Now, were racism and misogyny part of the past? Yes, they were, of course. And it might even be important to tell stories with racism and misogyny. But if racism and sexism are part of the story, they must not go unquestioned without
Why?
developing the repercussions
Why?
to them.
Why?
And they must never be glorified.
Why not?
Is he like a successful author at all? Because he keeps
No,
telling
I
us
think
like
he's
how
just
this
a college professor.
So,
absolutely like these are the
You
biggest
must
losers
never
ever. Like,
glorify
they never had like a
war.
successful book series by themselves. So he's telling Tolkien that like he's. I hope that he changed the subject by now, but like
This is
in
just the modern version of the Hayes Code.
yeah, like he's telling like a successful book that like, well, this looks like the most successful fantasy book in the world,
All
but like
these people
I can fix
hate-
this.
All these people hate the Hayes Code, but they'll do the same thing, but with the things that they don't like.
Why not? Like they know how to do it. Supposedly they have papers for that.
well, just think about this for a second. I don't know if you guys have read of any Philip K. Dick, but they made a. I haven't
A little
watched
bit.
it. Yeah, I haven't watched the series on whatever streaming service. I think it's Amazon. It's the Man in the High Castle series, right?
Yep.
If they did not show off the glory of Japan and the Reich, and I mean, it would be a pretty boring. Like, why are you in this conquered nation of imperialism if you don't show it off? Like, you don't exonerate it. Like, what?
It reminds me of a post from 4chan about the man in the high castle where it's talking about how women are laughing, enjoying themselves, walking safely at night without getting jumped by some mucker with a knife. Because all the streets are being patrolled by people armed with automatic weapons.
Yeah.
It's like there is benefits to such a society. Whether you're willing to throw yourself down before the fucking Reich is a different question.
Yeah, you need the philosophy of the bad guy in a story about a society about the bad guys winning, like the Reich, to be this big religious thing. Like, oh my God, it's like imagine reading Brave New World and no one's talking about how great Soma is and how great it is to be a beta or a delta or whatever, and you just go, I'm gonna live my life. Do. Like you gotta amp it up. You gotta talk about like, well, don't just have no consequence. Like, well, you could do that for whatever reason. Maybe I would prefer to have lots of consequences, but in a society like Brave New World or 1940 or 1984, where the bad guys win essentially, and of course you'd have that. Of course you'd have your state religion being pumped through the loudspeakers and the mind control.
Like, how exactly are you even going to criticize something that, like, let's say you're making a fantasy setting where most people are sexist. How are you even supposed to directly criticize it in a scene where maybe there aren't any characters that don't hold opposite beliefs? Are you just supposed to put in like a narrative breaking author's note there that says, I know
Sexism
this
bad.
looks bad.
Yeah, like
You
imagine
shouldn't hit woman.
imagine Fahrenheit 451. They don't burn any. Like they talk about burning books. They never actually show it though.
Because that's glorifying burning books.
I mean, it would just like lose a lot of value of what the firemen actually do. It's like, I'm a fireman and I burn books, but you never actually do it. You know how boring that would be?
Oh, it's like making a series about hunting monsters and never actually showing them hunting monsters. Because that's glorifying hunting.
That would, I mean, oh, you're going to offend some vegetarians. Like, it's not, don't watch it. I mean, what are you talking about? This is so silly. Oh, God. Anyway.
Especially true of all genres. Most encourages the capacity to imagine that which is not.
Okay. This is the same argument that video games are bad. If they have violence, kids are going to do violence. It's like, no, dude, we have that to let it out of our system. We have that to show it in a different light. Say, wow.
Well, he's basically making the, well, you can do anything in your fantasy setting, so why not make it basically a utopia?
And only my utopia. You have to like have, if you depict bad guys, they have to that happen to be misogynists. There have to be checks and balances, and he has to get a comeuppance and all this other jazz. You're like, okay, why? Is that part of the plot? Is that just one side character? Like, what's the? This is such a dumb argument.
Fantasy is a tool with vast potential to effect change.
Oh my god, it's a fucking fantasy book!
Basically,
Christ.
basically, when you're writing your fantasy book, make sure you do it as a political activist.
Yeah.
Do you genuinely think that Tolkien started writing his books and started writing about Eowyn because Baron Luthien was in the fucking trenches of World War One because he wanted to enact social change? Do you think lesser of him because he didn't? Do you think that people should go out and start writing the next Lord of the Rings in hopes of pushing the socialist change, the traditionalist change, the communist change, the fascist change? Does any of these sound appealing to you? Would you just want to sit down and read a fucking fantasy book?
It sounds like any genre must have political messages in it for some reason.
I don't want to
You have
sit
to be
down.
a political activist, and you also have to be activist for the things I agree with.
When I sit down and watch a fantasy movie or read a fantasy novel, the last thing I want to see is turn the next page and see excerpts from Death of a Salesman. Why the fuck would you ever want that shit anywhere near your entertainment?
The last thing I'm thinking is, man, I really hope this author explicitly advocates for the things I like.
Man, I really hope that the author goes out of character to tell me about how we should go back to the medieval ways. That would really improve this science fiction story.
Yeah, I recall the third book of the Scythe trilogy I reviewed on my channel years ago, that he got the trans element pushed a bit too far. Like, there's nothing wrong with having humans in the future being trans or whatever, because you've got nanotechnology changing your body every time because you're immortal. You could die, you come back, and it's no big deal. But the entire island of Madagascar, everyone is raised there to be feminine in the morning, so when the sun is rising, and masculine in the evening. And everyone's like this. And it just boggles common sense and logic that wouldn't some kids be like, but it's 12:01 and I still feel pretty feminine. I don't know what about you guys, but oh yeah, and I have a vagina and you don't, and what's going on? Like, they would question things very quickly. And yet this is the entire culture. This is normal for them up until they're in their 800th year. This is they don't question it. So, and there was a main character like that. And one of the characters was getting into this weird romantic relationship with them, and it's just like, this is dumb. This doesn't even make any sense that we would have some guy who's into males and females, depending on the time of day, that they come from an entire culture. It just, like, even my very left-leaning fellow who was reading with me was like, yeah, this is not the trans narrative at all. This is some bizarre nonsense. So you can do crazy shit like that in fantasy and science fiction, but it has to make sense. It doesn't matter what it is. It has to make logical sense. And when you're talking about a span of generations of people doing the same behavior that doesn't connect, you got a huge hole in your plot. So, and characterization in that regard. So yeah, you can screw up these messages, even good writers like Neil Shusterman. So anyway,
Fantasy where people can confront their struggles by imagining what doesn't exist.
My struggles.
Fantasy gives us new perspectives on the reality that we inhabit, and perhaps a bit of the insight and the courage that we need to make change. To those who are rightly critical of fantasy and authors like Tolkien, I would plead with you to resist labeling the person as a racist or a sexist, except in cases where you see a hardened position.
oh my God. So please don't do that until you do. So he's not racist or sexist until you think he is. Like, that's fantastic.
That is such a nothing sentence.
Don't accuse him of sexism and racism until you feel you're right to do so. Okay, when am I right to do so? I don't know, whenever you feel like it.
The orcs are black. Oh, that's racist. Oh my god.
The orcs are racist. No, they aren't. Well, I guess you're racist. And this guy pops up going, no, you can't do that. You gotta wait like 5 minutes, okay? The 5-minute code. If you're still arguing for orcs being not racist, then you can accuse them being racist.
Nuance when you're examining a person. Fiercely and lovingly, if possible, call out the use of racist and sexist tropes or any other kind.
Okay, how can you be sexist in a story mostly about guys? What like the few women in there are going to be like hyper focused on like Eowyn and Galadriel and that's it?
Mud, it's sexist because it already doesn't have women.
Okay.
Not
But, like,
portraying them means hatred.
Joke aside, but like Galadriel is like held at such a high level in the story. Like everyone loves Galadriel because for a right reason. Like she is a voice of reason, but Eowyn as well as like she earned her status for like one of the bravest humans in the story, and it's just this guy is like just clapping at these so-called fans that they. Calling the Tolkien of all people racist and sexist. This is a parody.
Eowyn also wouldn't come across as brave as she does if there was also like a bunch of other women beside her on the battlefield.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like she is brave because she is also the one out of place, and she's doing something that's more dangerous for her than it is for anyone else.
It also plays into like this, like, well, I think it's the Witch King that reveals his weakness essentially. I think on the battlefield, or like, was it well known that like no man can kill him? I can't remember that detail.
Yeah, it's a well-known prophecy. He
Oh,
can't
okay.
be killed. No man will kill him.
Yeah.
This is sounding more like a pamphlet from some professor at some other university who's a feminist. He said, hey, if you attend my seminar, I'll give you a good instructional video or pamphlet to give to your students on feminism and sexism and patriarchy and blah, blah, blah. And he's just mouthing it off without actually addressing this issue in Tolkien or fantasy or what. Like, I'd like to have a good example and then say, why is that and him tell us why that's a problem, because I am
kind of curious. I wonder if he's like selling a course or something based on this.
Yeah, but
I think the last minute's gonna be that. Or
And
he's
this
gonna
is
like flex
basically
with
an
his
ad
book.
for it.
come to my Udemy classroom, yeah, something like that.
I did look up in the meantime his profile, and he has published like 3 or 4 books so far. All of them were released this year.
Are they
So,
all books that like criticize literature, or does he have?
No,
like,
like
any actual book?
it's an actual novel, like
Oh,
some
okay.
kind of trilogy. Yeah.
I bet he's got all kinds of women doing all kinds of things.
It's
And
the
if he
color
doesn't,
lily
do we
has a
get to
woman
hang
shooting lightning out of her hands.
Cool.
And if he
How
doesn't,
it
do we
came
get
from
to kill
Star
him?
Wars.
She is all the Sith. That's beautiful. Okay. Let's go.
I can leave a link in the chat.
You really want to read this guy's work? Okay.
Hey,
Absolutely.
we don't discriminate here, even if we disagree with our opinions. If he writes good stuff, well, who are we to judge?
Yeah, I agree
It's
with
like you
that.
said, even if what Tolkien said is stupid and you hate him for it or whatever, if he wrote good stuff, read the stuff, enjoy it. You don't need to. If it's not in the story or whatever, then it doesn't matter. Like, we should offer the same courtesy even to people that have political agendas.
Okay. One more minute.
Of discrimination where you see it. To fans of fantasy like myself, I ask you to listen with grace, wisdom, and humility when you hear such critical voices. rather than taking them as a personal attack on you or your favorite authors, or being angry at them for reducing your enjoyment of your favorite book. Those voices might just be the ones that will enrich our genre.
How?
I fucking doubt that.
Hasn't been happening in the past decades, so I really doubt that as well.
We have listened to dozens of people on this channel that make stupid arguments against comic books and movies and other books. They do not hold up to even the surface level scrutiny, and I couldn't imagine having a conversation with them to see what they really think, because this sounds so not disingenuous. It sounds like he's just sort of on this platitude of, well, I talk to women and I listen and they are sensitive to reading about Tolkien because they feel whatever. And you're like, okay, women feel stuff. Readers can feel whatever they want. That doesn't mean that makes the book bad or Tolkien's depiction of a certain group of people bad. In fact, that's usually a good thing, that a fictional piece of work can affect you in any way. To say, wow, Galadriel's amazing, as opposed to, wow, why is there only one Galadriel? We need two, because that'd be silly. Like, if we had Tom Bombadil's wife, a literal goddess, just blowing away orcs, I'd be like, what the what the hell's happening?
The story is not about that. Like, the story is more about like these pathetic loser hobbits overcoming all the odds, being like celebrated. Like the beginning of the story, like everyone looks at them as jokes. They're like, really? Is this guy that we're gonna trust the ring to? Like the most destructive weapon of all? It's like the elves that are like guarding around and the rangers, like they always encounter these halflings. They are like, what are these gonna do?
Yeah, and this is why a lot of fans or critics, I guess you could say, look at the Eagles as a minor plot hole, not a huge plot hole, but as like, well, why couldn't we just go there with these super powerful flying creatures and cut our travel time? It's like, oh, yeah, I guess Tolkien could have...
Yeah, you see that in the fucking movie. The
Right.
Felbies immediately go down on them.
Yeah, and we perhaps needed Tolkien to lampshade that fact a bit more, because we know he could have done it, but it's not...
No, really. I
mean,
they're
he's
just as
expressed why they
corruptible.
can't
They're
do
just
it.
as corruptible as like anyone else in the story.
Right. I'm just saying that is the biggest argument or complaint I've heard from Tolkien as the story in a plot sense. That could be like, okay, that would be an issue. Not, it may be like if there was, I don't know, a female eagle and they could talk and they were having stupid issues.
Oh no. No.
Like
They do talk. They do talk in the Hobbit, so
right. And
they do talk.
if it was,
And that's not... He essentially didn't view it as canon, if I remember correctly, with a lot of the elements, such as the giants. The giants got completely written out of Lord of the Rings.
right. So if that was a factor of, female sensibilities and behaviors and the culture of the Eagles and all this other jazz, then you could say, oh, okay, yeah, this could be depicted a certain light, and maybe Tolkien might have had to talk to, I don't know, women in the war that he came from and how they were impacted by it. That would be a practical use of the feminist lens in relation to plot, because there are
Practical use of a political lens.
Yeah, because you just can't use a feminist lens in Tolkien and go, well, where are the women? It's like, well, they're not there. That's fine. They're not supposed to be. And if you want to say, well, this is the patriarchy, it's like, it's just men going to war. That's not the patriarchy. If women want to go to war, and they do, we have some examples, very few, but they're there. That's fine. And that one example is all you need. You don't need like 50 of them, and you have to go to their backstory. It's like, no, you got one. One's good. And then you have the elven perspective on a female, and she's more than just a female elven perspective. She's a whole bunch of stuff. So it's not necessary. You don't need the Venezuelan Eskimo bisexual, viewpoint. You just don't. It doesn't make sense. So you have to be very careful with these lenses that this guy is saying. You have to have feminism. You have to have political sensibilities. You got to have sexual whatever and all this jazz. No, you don't.
Just immediately there, you have to have the political lens. The best stories usually start with, man, I really want to tell people about X. Or I really want to get Y off my chest. Or I want to cope about Z, like Dunn did with his, I think it's the Ice Cream series he wrote. Based on his fucking loathing of how Game of Thrones fucked up the whole Walker's storyline.
Oh, you mean the show?
Yeah. Where they just die in one battle. And he wrote an entire series trying to go, okay, how would this work out if you had more than 2 brain cells?
Yeah.
Like, that's an excellent way to motivate yourself to get working on something that you've been meaning to do for a while. Or just to think of something that other people might be interested in reading. But to come out and say, oh yeah, you should do it for political reasons, that is one of the worst things you could possibly tell someone that's trying to get into writing, especially fantasy, which is so dense, both in other voices, like other creators in the industry that are trying to get their stuff in and have their voices heard, and just in the sheer volume of text you both need references from to understand what fantasy is about, and what you actually need to appeal to the fantasy crowd.
That's another thing. Imagine if like there was a black fantasy author who was making a bunch of fantasy books based off of African settings, and a bunch of people were like, "Well, you need to put in a more white perspective."
He would probably... His rotational speed in his coffin when he passes away and he hears that people are just talking shit about his work because he didn't include white people could probably power the entirety of Africa.
Alrighty.
Like,
there's actually a genre of black science fiction out there. So.
You mean Afrocentrism?
I don't know if that's what it's called. I can't remember the name of it, but it is specific about basically if we had a black-focused futuristic society.
Oh, I know the movie's name, but I can't say it on stream.
Okay, fair enough.
For me personally, I especially want to pay attention to authors who are women and people of color.
Good for you.
I have a lot to learn from them. They have visions that can offer me new perspectives.
On how to cross your legs? Like what perspective? Like what are you talking about? Like
Based on their race and like their gender.
Based
is
on
that
their
really?
race, sex, their sexual orientation, and how they decide to lay down on someone.
What difference does it make what gender they are when they write a good or bad? Like you like the authors that are good, not because they're women. That's stupid.
The idea that we only have a lot to learn from them because they're fantasy authors and they're women is so stupid.
On this one, I'll be willing to give the devil his due that having different people from different backgrounds can give a lot of information or reflections from different cultures that you didn't consider. But the actual quality of those interactions are not guaranteed, just like talk to anybody can be a fucking coin toss. Like, they are not inherently going to be a positive view or positive influence on your future work. They could fill your head with fucking garbage, or they could fill your head with gold. There's no inherent value there. Just because they are a man or a woman or a fucking dog.
This is like a deliberate trap that he's trying to set up, because like we can't just like deny that, like, no, we don't have to listen to them. Oh, but you mean that you don't have to listen to women at all? No, if they don't contain any sensible sentence in their argument against this author, then like there's no need to listen to them. Maggie Mae Fish is like a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
This guy is a perfect example.
Well, that goes without saying, but yeah, like just like imagine that like Maggie Mae Fish approaches this guy and like tells him how to write his novel, because like he's supposedly like a woman and knows very well everything because she lives in LA. Knows all the perspectives of like how colonialism is so bad.
She has so many varied perspectives because she lives in one of the largest cities in the world. That's probably
No,
why
she has all
hates
the
so
good
many different
perspective
people.
because she's an upper middle class white one from California. Duh.
Who may or may not be starring in porn.
Excuse me? I think it's time we move on.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I remember
Let's
that.
move on that.
Only Dunn can answer that question.
I remember.
Oh, Jesus.
I remember that question. I don't know the answer, but Peterson was asked like, "Who's your favorite female author?" There's another. He mentioned some, I think, Canadian as well, who was not the opposite, but she was like comparable to. What's her name? It was another female feminist author, and I was like,
Isn't that like the meme when he thinks like 1 hour long?
he takes like 8 seconds, or it's a bit of a stretch. He's like, he just thinks about it for a moment because he's read so many books, right? He's like, who do I like? For me, it's like Agatha Christie because I've read all of her books. It's like I didn't even think about her. I didn't even think of her as a female. I'm just like, I like Agatha Christie. She's a great writer. She's the best I know in this genre. And I didn't care about her history. I didn't care who she's married to. I don't care. Like, none of that mattered. It has nothing to do with it. So she just happens to be a female, and it has nothing to do with the quality of her writing, which is great. So that, to me, is a quality, because the fact that the name attached to it could have been a pen name for all I care. The name attached to it is irrelevant. So that to me is a good book. But hey,
My favorite white male authors, even as I learn to acknowledge the possible shortcomings in their portrayals of race and gender and culture. And I look forward to finding some new favorites. For example, maybe the next great epic series by a woman author. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll join me again when I return to reviewing some of the greatest fantasy of all time in my next videos.
Never cover this person again.
all right.
How can someone who teaches that? I don't know if this guy teaches, but like this is so dumb. Total lack of logic.
Okay, let's get to some memes. I'm sure we got some from you guys. All right. Okay. Definitely today. Look at my biggest guy, my very special boy. Oh, it's these guys, the orcs.
Oh, isn't this like a French orc? This is perfectly what we wanted.
Is this a quote from Hamilton, like a singing joke? I don't know lyrics. Could be. I have no idea. Oh no, Lal's request. Here we go.
Develop, or how about a world without misogyny? And there are many.
Why? Why would I want that?
Develop.
Okay, he's just quoting me. Fair enough. Taking that out of context, it is a little strange, yes. Oh, I've seen this meme. Fantastic. What do we got? Orcs Explained. Japanese isekai pig orc, girl orc. Yep, that's pretty much manga for you. Green orc, Lord of the Rings orc. Okay. Yep. This is the only type of fantasy I want. What is this? I could barely read this, but I'm assuming.
Which one are you looking at?
It's a manga page of, I think, an orc father and an elven mother.
That voice is, you returned at last. Look, is he adorable? Also, please let me introduce you to my husband. An elf is struggling to deal with the declining birth rate. Sure enough, the village future is...
All right. Go.
Yeah. This is the movie I meant. This is an actual movie.
Jesus.
Can't say that one on stream, Spud.
Whoa, I'm not going to jump on that one. Okay, and that was it. That is quite the ending meme we have there. Holy crap!
Mm.
Curious where you guys found that, but you guys have more different, diverse tastes than I do. Okay, well, that was, what would we call that? That's boilerplate sort of response from a feminist.
It's quite unfortunate, I have to say.
Not much nuance, not much explanations outside of ideology.
Because in the first minute, I was hoping that he would attack and deconstruct these arguments, like why they are stupid in the first place, and then he just like joined the crowd. Only was clapping and not giving like any reason like why we should actually listen to those people. Because
there's also a lot of putting the horse before the cart argumentation, or the cart before the horse argumentation.
Yeah.
Where he argues from a point of view where you already agree with the premise, when he has to argue the premise still.
There's something wrong with his, I wouldn't say his posture, but the way he, like, there's something like...
It's his head movements, it's his hand movements. He comes off as condescending. Comes off as he's viewing himself as higher than thou.
Like
and has to portray himself as being non-threatening.
As
like someone like a slaver.
Yeah, like I've met very good English teachers, PhDs in English and all kinds of other degrees. And they're very straightforward, clear, and they're confident. This guy's like, oh, I'm like he's trying to be like a weird therapist.
Same. I also had a writing teacher who was very much on the side of being very left wing and liberal.
Right.
And he was still a good teacher. He wasn't like this.
Yeah. And I remember having arguments with him even about politics because he was so open and didn't care about, saying something bad, or it was just, he was very open with his ideas, and his ideas about English and grammar and tone and tense and all these things were just like, he knew exactly what to say. And, all this, like, he would tell us, like, he would get submissions from people. There was all this pornography, all this Harlequin romance stuff from the women, and all this really weird crap from the guys that was like really like not making too much sense. And it all come down to grammar, number one. He didn't care what you wrote about. He could read anything so long as he could understand it. So if you actually typed it properly, because you would take either a creative writing course or a business English course to get your points to go to the next semester. So he was the more fun option, but he was so good at his job, and he just did that one course. So he was kind of like this black horse of the faculty at college for me, because the college was a tech college. It was for programming, animation, all kinds of computer work, and English was just sort of like, well, we have lots of immigrants, we're going to teach them English and make sure that their English skills for writing are up to par. But he was like, well, do you like creative writing? Do you like being imaginative? Because we did have some video game programs as well. So that they thought that'd be fun. And he was so good. And he had connections with the Annals, or the Library of, the Royal Library of Ontario. So you would actually get published in the library as an anthology.
Cool.
And that's what happened to me. I kept attending the class and helped edit other people's work. We had roundtable discussions. But he was like, he had like Oxford commas are a thing, and this is why we do them, and you may not like it, but I recommend using them and all the reasons why. So he was very straightforward, didn't give a shit how he talked to you. He would swear, and he'd say, well, those aren't my words, you wrote them. And he would read the sentence out again and get all these swear words, doesn't matter. He's just reading as if he's reading any other sentence. So he had this sensibility of, this is my job, I'm very good at what I do, and I'm very confident what I'm talking about. This guy was wishy-washy. He was just like, oh, I got to be careful talking about. And I have to put my hand on my chest every time I talk about something sensitive. It's like, oh my God, dude.
We gotta listen to the minorities and the women.
He's gotta constantly signal that he's a virtuous person.
Yeah. He comes off as a predator.
He does. He comes off as like a Saul Goodman. Like he's trying to sell me like something like on the table.
Well, yeah, really nothing we haven't heard from either Maggie May like 3 years ago, or other people that are just not as creepy?
It's all the same, really. It's
your Anita Sarkeesian rip package from 10 years ago when she was on the panels that Sargon used to rip and tear into. But now it's, we can't just call all of it sexist and racist and homophobic. We can't call it out. We just have to state that it is. And that he said Mongols once. That's bad. You shouldn't call somebody a Mongol and say that there was a negative trait from a European perspective. That's not very good Samaritan of you. Or whatever he wants to fucking say.
He also can't say that some of the characteristics of a race just don't look very good to him. Like having a flat nose.
Oh my God, a man has an opinion about aesthetics about other people. He must be a racist. What? What if women do that to men? Are they racists? I like tall men. Oh, she's a racist. No, she's just voicing her opinion. Like, what? Okay.
that's not.
No racism like height racism.
Yeah, well, anyway, I'm going to go get a drink. It's nice and warm in here. Time for some bubbly, watery something. I don't even know what. Just going to get something to cool down. But thank you, guys. That was a little different than what I was expecting we were going to do today because apparently we were all set to go yesterday, but I wasn't around. I was downtown, so I do apologize. But we did something different, which is unexpected and definitely in my wheelhouse. So no sweat, and thanks for everyone popping in at the last minute, Mike, especially because I know you're there. But you listen, so thank you. See, there he is, Mike. Boom.
He gave us the spiritual support.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. Have yourself a great evening, and maybe tomorrow we'll see you. Who knows? Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.